This book is a poetry collection that has had a rather troubled publishing history. It was published by a small press, and I won't say who it was. It was published in 2017 by a small press, and he produced the book, and then we had a disagreement. And so he withdrew the book from Amazon, so there's no record of that first published edition, and I'm not going to mention who the publisher was. We had a disagreement. And then so later I republished it and put it back up on Amazon, and then took it down again, still not satisfied with it. So right now it's in manuscript form. But what it is a collection of all the poetry that I wrote, that I managed to actually hang on to over the years since college. So everything dates from either before 2017, but in 2017 when we were publishing it, I was also adding new poems. So it is a sort of retrospective of all my poetry prior to 2017. So these things we no longer are. And it has a preface here, the cycle. Civilization begins in wonder and awe. The visions of the planets crawling across the ebony sky, the descent of gods from the heavens who came down to take up their dwellings at the tops of ziggurats, the building of the pyramids, the raising of the cathedrals with their transformation of the metaphysics of light into the jeweled phenomenon of the precious stones of the New Jerusalem. In every single case, it is wonder that is the motivating principle that brings new civilizations into being. But the vision that brings the civilization into being, alas, is mortal and eventually dies out, as the inspiring idea is depleted through the process of incarnating it repeatedly in art, science, music, literature, etc. The society loses touch with the vision and ends by becoming a practical affair of engineering achievements and technological wonders. Hence the movement from Zeus, Apollo, and Athena to the degeneration of the Colosseum, the Roman aqueducts, and the huge forums that function as technological supplements and replacements for the beauty and majesty of the early gods. And when that inspiration finally loses touch with the spark that set the initial flame, the flame sputters and dies out, and it cannot be revived. This was the informing idea of Oswald Spengler's 1918 book, The Decline of the West, which Spengler had inherited from Goethe, who before him had taken it from Vico, while Vico borrowed it from Hesiod. In India, the same ideas there are articulated as the doctrine of the great Mahayugas, declining down from the Krita, Trita, and Dvapara yugas into the Kali Yuga. No golden age lasts. They all give way to silver, bronze, and finally iron ages, or Kali Yugas, in which technological substitutes are implemented for the loss of the original vision. Karl Jaspers, in his 1949 book, The Origin and Goal of History, saw the entire process unfolding in two stages, or what he called breathings. In the first stage, that of multiple breaths, as it were, everything was local. The Promethean age, as he termed it, was based upon the domestication of fire, the evolution of language, and the discovery of tools, an age long since vanished with the termination of the Upper Paleolithic. There followed the mythical age of the high civilizations of Sumer and Egypt, when the gods were instituted by the state, and the individual was entirely subordinate to both state and god. Then came what he famously called the Axial Age, lasting from about 800 BC to 200 BC, in which there spread in revolt against the first generation of high civilization backed by the state an individual vision quest based upon the teaching of self-salvation as articulated by prophets like Yajnavalkya, the Buddha, Parshvanatha, Confucius, Lao Tzu, and Pythagoras. Jasper saw this stage eventually giving way to the decadence of Heidegger's modern age of enframing, in which technology covers the entire planet like a dome and seeks to store all of its energies as a standing reserve on demand for future use as necessary. But then Jasper saw a second great breathing, as he called it, forming in the 20th century, that was not local at all, but rather global in extent, in which a single breath taken by humanity as a whole would lead to the rebirth of a new Promethean age of technical wonders. The goal of history, as Jasper saw it, was the creation of a single humanity upon the earth. The vision of Jaspers, a pupil of Heidegger, is a linear one that sees a telos unfolding throughout history, but it is not a comfortable fit with Spengler's vision of the shift from Kultur to Zivilisation that he saw as the morphology of all civilizations. Each one for him began with lyrical wonder, a sort of astonished gaze at the phenomena of the world, much like Heidegger's idea of the Greek notion of being as phusis, in which forms mysteriously unconcealed themselves, flashed forth, and disappeared. Each civilization, as Spengler saw it, ended with science and technology attempting to replace that originating sense of wonder with the supplement of applied engineering and pragmatics. I have structured the following collection of poems in accordance with Spengler's cycle, dividing the first half into poems of Genesis, filled with a sense of wonder and awe at the mysteries of the world as a revelation unto itself. In the second half, poems of degeneration. The mystery is gone and technology has taken over, in framing and blasting the world with technological substitutes. In the first cycle, living forms, stars, and atoms are made by gods, which constitute a powerful revelation of their informing energies. In the second cycle, technology attempts to appropriate the powers of these gods by stealing their creative abilities and substituting them with analogs in the form of genetic engineering, splitting the atom, and technical wastage of the planet. I will not rule out the vision of Jaspers, however, to the effect that globalization is making one world out of us all and re-beginning the Promethean age anew. It is very possible that technology itself is now becoming analogous to Arnold Toynbee's idea of the decayed Hellenic world as the chrysalis from out of which Christianity came to bloom, for perhaps technology in similar fashion is now becoming the chrysalis for the emergence of a new planetary spirituality that will be reborn through its skeletal frame. It is a tempting thought to see the present age as pregnant with this new vision, a vital antidote to the decadent and degenerate world horizon that is currently ruled by technics in the form of psychopharmaceuticals, genetic engineering, and monstrous forms of physics. So without further ado, I let the poems speak for themselves. Poems of Genesis. Gods. There was a time once when poets sitting on cracked marble urns invoked the muses, or when the angel whispered into Matthew's ear the tale of a man who came to earth as a god. Even Milton's Holy Spirit hovered like a dove upon the vast abyss and made it pregnant. Though I make no such pretense to an invocation here, the poems that follow in the present cycle are full of gods, and that should be enough. When the moon was gigantic. In those days, volcanoes ruptured the earth like an accordion of rippling stone, where cataracts of glowing magma striped the ground with ribbons of liquid rock. During the daytime, clouds of ash were thick enough to erase the young sun from a sky that was only then changing from salmon pink to a deep aquatic blue. The moon rolled slowly across the night, so close to the earth that it seemed you could reach up and touch it. Vanilla neon. Enormous fern trees erupted from the ground, and huge golden red dragonflies owned the air, while the wet green creatures with 4 legs that had only just wandered from the azure seas were laying their eggs out of the water to be safe from predators. Because one day out of one of those eggs would hatch a tiny pink animal that would awaken with gods sleeping in its neurons. Centaur. It was not possible, but one afternoon they were digging and they found the skeleton of a centaur. In the hot, dry, dusty air, they swept the dirt from the bones, astonished as they examined the vertebrae, which dissolved and fused with the backbone of a horse. For a while they simply stood there, and no one knew what to say, and the empty, scared faces of the archaeologists stared at one another, aghast. But after a debate that lasted all afternoon, they came to a resolution and buried it again. No one was ever allowed to speak of it, and they all agreed that it had somehow been a mistake of perception. Meanwhile, the bones of the centaur slumbered beneath the dirt and returned to the earth's memory, where it dreamed of an age of gods with legs like serpents and men with the hooves of horses. Credo. I believe there is one God who burns through everything that exists. The first men who realized this cut holes into the earth for their dead, hoping their fish-wide eyes would open once more like portals to another world. They set up skulls in the pink evening air and danced beneath the carnal sun, wearing the skins of dead animals, while the fire blazed from a mammoth bone hut behind them. At night they gazed up at the ancient sky with its zoomorphic circle, wondering where their dead had gone, for they knew their souls had ascended to the dark vault of the heavens, where they burned among the stars. Lilith. It went on like that for many years, cutting rows into the ground with a stone tied to a stick, planting seeds and watching them grow. His house was made out of stone blocks, stacked to form a dome like an igloo with dusty sunlight pouring in from the always open front entrance. And the small bed in the corner cut from the skins of animals, bear skins mostly. It was already dirty and stained. There was never enough to eat. Years went by like that, and more years. The worst part of it was that sometimes he could see processions of angels striding over the arched green hills, thin giant figures radiating light and walking upright on their hind legs, carrying posts and poles and banners and insignia, and they never said a word to him. They didn't even know he existed. Nobody knew. Inside his head, he could only think, "You didn't say it would be like this." But there was no response because there never was any response. One day a panther stuck its head into the entrance while he was sleeping. He heard its distinct snuffling, awoke quickly, and threw a stone at it. It went away. Years went by. There was a river not far from his house, and each day he went there to bathe. And each day on his way back, he looked at the green plants in the earth and yearned. And yearned. But then something strange happened. One morning he awoke with a pain in his side, and when he pulled away the animal skin, there it was, a pulsing, throbbing orifice through which some kind of small creature was presently making its way out. It was gray, but shaped like he was, and he watched in horror as the wet thing that came out of him snuffled as it drew its first breath. He put the creature inside a wooden box that he had made, but soon it grew too large for the box, so he had to make another larger box. The creature was like him. As it grew over the next few days, rapidly shedding its skin each time, soon it was regarding him from the corner of the stone house with brown, wary eyes. It looked like him, but it wasn't like him. Something was missing from between its legs, and its chest was soft. It kept growing. Soon it was larger than he was, standing over him, demanding food from the garden. He watched it grow scales around its feet, which slowly turned into the talons of a bird. Wings sprouted from its back, and it could not speak to him except in grunts. Then one day it flew away. Bad soil. Dreams grow like flowers from out of the abysses within us. At one time, gods grew like dreams from out of the brown earth, where people built their stone huts and erected their adobe walls lined with the skulls of dead ancestors. Priests ascended the mud brick steps of their ziggurats to meet the elusive gods and waited, watching the stars for their descent. But when the soil is bad, nothing grows, not even the gods. Desert rainstorm. Rainstorm over the desert. In the great distance, maroon-colored clouds. Rain coming down in glistening silver streams over jagged obsidian-blade mountains, while copper flashes boom silently over the dark hills, where thin trails of cattle can be seen lacerating them like scars, and steel pylons bearing enormous cables walk like giants. Phantom fish. The desert was ancient. Its dried yellow hills, though, still remembered the great oceans which had once covered it. The skeletons of tiny phantom fish were pressed into the limestone and granite rocks of its sedimentary strata. The mountains rose and fell with time like huge slumbering behemoths, but the fish skeletons were memories of deep blue-green seas, cut with sun shadows fanning out through the depths like sea beams before the change came, when the fins grew longer and became lobe fins, and the swim bladder became lungs, because the fish knew that the future lay in the brown soils on the land, where the green trees had already pulled themselves out of the water, foreseeing the coming of life. Now it could take gulps of air and make its way with its flippers to a muddy little tide pool, where a fragment of sun lay gleaming as it crawled to give birth to the future. But the fish inside the rock could only remember all of this magnificence as it dreamed, and the mountain crawled slowly over the umber desert, carrying hordes of dead fish within its belly. The birth of a god. Inside the depths of a cell, there is a tiny mind at work shaping proteins to bind clusters into living organs. This same little mind builds gods in the womb of a man's mind, just the way it grows dreams in our nightly theater. And as an embryo in its mother womb is brought softly into form by the same laws which have shaped the planets in their molds of curved space, so too, somewhere upon this earth, there waits the embryo of a god, resting in the mother plasma of a man's mind. Marsyas in denim. No god ever consoled you. Not in the beginning, anyway. Not when it was first starting. Instead, you became the god. And the pain, as it was finishing, was searing, as the flesh was peeled from your ribs in long, thin, pink strips of meat. Marsyas in denim, standing in the wash of an ivory-colored streetlight. Deserted meal. Silver fish on a ceramic plate. Gold sunlight from the late afternoon raining in through the dirty window strikes the fish body with silver luminescence, and after a time the light turns a pale copper as the sun melts like a candle on the horizon. You have seen this before, eternity in a passing moment, and now you are unable to finish your meal. At night, alone with the wine, you watch through the window as the slim gold coin of the moon passes out of the womb of the earth, growing larger and brighter, until finally a great burning moon floats up into the black sky, perfectly centered in the window. You have seen this too before, you think, as you pour yourself another glass of wine, light a cigarette, and have a long, lonely conversation with the moon. Coyotes. Dim and distant, you can hear the coyotes howling out of the deep recesses of the night somewhere. The sound of a speeding motorcycle. Yellow sodium painting the night vanilla. Faded. The stars burning as they always have, with nothing to say to you, but you have your loneliness and the night. Metamorphosis. Consider the seed. An ancient force has compressed a green world of cells bound together by a common image of the whole in each part. But all it takes is a flicker of moist brown earth power like lightning in a storm-cracked sky to awaken something. Dark juices are then flowing and slow forces are working to split the shell from within. Warm sunlight erupts through the vesicles as cell upon cell in joyful unison pushes down the moisture-seeking roots and upwards the stem to unfold a leaf. Gold fire from the blue dome above explodes inside, and 1,000 cells join together that form petals the color of red wine. Steinerian plant. A vertical axis connects the earth to the sun and draws the plant from the ground. It grows and mirrors the spiraling planets above. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the sun pull it upward to form the flower, while Mercury, Venus, and the moon draw it downwards into the earth. An invisible astral cocoon surrounds the flower, a cocoon which soaks up sun forces and radiates them down to the plant ego at the earth's core. Thus the plant aligns the sun with the earth's energies. That is how the world looks when it is engulfed by the mind of a mystic. Childhood. There were orange trees everywhere. We would cut them open, and their pulp would get beneath our fingernails like white clay. We would run through the sprinklers, and Mother would set out a jar of dark gold tea to bake in the sun. It was so hot that the heat would transform approaching cars into gray liquid ghosts. During the summer monsoons, the sun would disappear behind floating, oily clouds, and lightning would go off like flashbulbs as the rains would transform the pavement into glossy black sheets. The next day, earthworms would cover the driveway, and I would have to be careful not to step on them. The sun would dry them out, all cracked and frail. The buzzing of the cicadas would make the sun sound like it was plugged in. Father was a ghost, a glass of clear gold liquid always in his hand as he designed his rockets. Mother sat in front of the television, her face painted a faint squirming blue. Men would often come by to visit Father with shiny black suitcases and huge leather envelopes. Their cigarette smoke would stain the air a light vanilla brown as they sat around the kitchen table, talking and sometimes shouting. I would twirl my baton and think that someday I would like to ride in a rocket too. But then came the day when Mother didn't come out of her room at all, and Father disappeared down into the basement where I was forbidden ever to go. His chemicals couldn't save her. And I would stare out the window at Old Man's orchard across the street. Autumn leaf. Somewhere in the late afternoon, as the red sun lay burning in the trees, the wind blew through the field that I was standing in, and I paused to pick up a dead thing, an orange autumn leaf which had blown past me. I held it in my palm, a piece of the past, gone brittle as the shell of a cicada. Then I realized that what I was holding contained within itself a whole universe of pulsing atoms, not dead at all, but merely waiting for another form somewhere else, in another field perhaps, or another life. Some of these very same atoms may stand in another field someday, beholding the ruined miniature cathedral of another dead leaf. But isn't the universe like that? Gigantic to us, but in the mind of a god no more than a leaf, a universe of burning suns to be held in the palm in the late afternoon, and then discarded as the wind blows among the trees of the dawning evening. Vanished people. There were many people here once. Now they have all gone away. Leaves jitter a dance macabre, tiny skeletons upon the sidewalk. Dream poem. If a god can become a man, and a seed can become a flower, then why should we be astonished that in our dreams a man can become a butterfly? Miracles. Think of all the fury and violence that attends the birth of a star, a great burning furnace soaking up energy from the abysses of black space, and then pouring forth a fountain of flame. Such must have been the agonies attending the birth of a god when men lay writhing with pregnant skulls full of new beings. For at one time long ago such miracles occurred as the birth of a god or the creation of a star. Nietzsche. At times Nietzsche sounds hysterical, I admit. He signed his last letters Dionysus and the Crucified, but we must remember that his soul was warped by loneliness, sickness, and poverty. Too much, in other words, of too little. A fate that was like Van Gogh's, perhaps, only Nietzsche did not cut off a piece of his ear and offer it to a terror-stricken prostitute. Instead, he sliced entire cartographies from his brain and made a clearing for the gods to come take him. Beauty. All things are full of beauty, yet all things live in sorrow. Consider a blade of grass that shivers alone in the calm evening air. Beyond it, hordes of gnats dance in the fading orange light, while the late afternoon birds sing an elegy to the dying summer sun that rests for just a moment upon the edge of the world before plunging beneath it into shadow. All men are filled with fear, for they know what end awaits them. They arise from out of the darkness and sing their songs beneath the sun, painting joy and loneliness across the world's canvas, love and lust, wine and cross, God and roses, so many minds like mirrors of silence held up to nothing. All things are beautiful, and yet all things are terrible, for all beings are part of God, and this magnificent universe his body, all the stars so many burning cells that make up his blood, and the cycles of the planets whirling in endless cosmic rhythm, the pulse of his beating heart. Even you and I are but two of his atoms crawling on a dust grain, whirling in a wash of pale summer sunlight over the white surface of eternity. Ant poem. Shipwrecked ant on my lampshade, in a canvas full of dust, will never again use its body to carry food back to the hive, although it is becoming something after all, the world's tiniest mummy. In the evening. The sun rests a moment in the gray air, as though pausing to reflect upon all that has been done. The day's events drift away like so many ghosts of trees and men and mountains and flowers. It remembers nothing. But now comes the darkening of a different world, of yellow sodium pools spilling down on parked cars with barking dogs in the quiet distance, and the mute hulks of shadowy houses lit only by the pale blue light of 1,000 television screens. Dead leaves clatter across the sidewalk. The sun has liquefied to a thin layer of burning gold on the horizon. A moment of silence, and then it is evening. Dream X-ray. What's inside a dream? Dark oceans full of bioluminescent forms and ancient energies more subtle than any hand or eye could know of. These forms are like radiant fish that glow in the sunless ocean depths where the sun's rays can never reach. So they make their own light out of burning cells and phosphorescent skin as they drift through our nightly theater. Where do they come from, these fish? Transubstantiation. If 1,000 tiny crosses with little Christs nailed to them punctured every cell of your body, like viruses of the Logos, would it be considered an invasion or a transubstantiation? Orpheus poem. There came the day when something you said, or something I said, was left unfinished. Wait for me, you said, and I said, but I can't. And then one of us was gone. But you said, then I'll come find you. And the god smiled and opened the gate that led downwards where you stood gazing into the abyss and stepped forward to begin. This is the poem from out of which the cycle of Orpheus in the world interior came. Long nights. The problem was, too many long nights spent alone looking out the window at the streetlight, even longer nights pacing the floor when she wouldn't call, eating in cafes with the sound of trucks rumbling by on the interstate, the woman in the window looking out at you and wringing her hands over some unendurable loss, airport lounges where an endless stream of blurred pink faces passed you by, heedless of you and your wreckage, long drives through quiet desert roads where you would look out at the city from above, watching the orange ball of the sun liquefy beyond the distant humps of the mountains. The strange green shudder of the leaves in the sodium light on a windy autumn evening in November that made you feel alien and distant. The remnants of extinct love. Scissors, torn pictures, gold liquid in clear glass bottles, nights spent wandering the front yard alone with a drink in your hand and nobody to talk to but the ancient dying stars, the strangely quiet hulks of the eerie houses across the street with their dim, unreachable occupants, quiet, dark, and alone, You had many conversations with God, but God wasn't even listening. Telephone pole. Telephone pole beside the road, leaning at an angle with a tuft of yellowed grass at its base, just like a crucifix. Thousands of them across the city, so many crucifixions of electricity harnessed to perform the task of carrying words across wires. In the days of the Romans, Parthians were crucified along the roads, and the brittle shells of their corpses decorated the highways with festive colors of red, brown, green. But they did not conduct words from pole to pole, only silence and agony. Palm tree. Palm tree, against a sky the color of oranges, a charcoal stencil above the suburban rooftops that rest in the gloom, vanilla and cream-colored triangles chopping into the edge of the horizon as the sky washes out to a pale pink-white mauve. Osiris and Christ. A god who was cut to pieces and then sutured up again, except for his phallus, swallowed by a fish. He pronounced from the darkness of his throne judgments over the souls brought to him, where and when, why and how. But wrapped in a linen shroud, it was all he could do to hold himself together so that the pieces would not slide apart again. There came then one day a god from the stars who walked among men, the Logos made flesh. At Cana he turned water into wine. At the Sea of Galilee he walked on water before an astonished band of disciple fishermen, and he performed exorcisms which drove demons out of men and into herds of swine. Osiris was lord of the darkness, but Christ was lord over all, and he was born from the great fish of the Magnus Anus, the same fish that swallowed the genitals of Osiris. Do you think it is possible that without Christ, science, with its command over the physical world, would even exist? Without exorcisms, no psychiatry. Without walking on water, no earth-conquering galleons. Without the change of water into wine, no chemical elements. And without the transfiguration on the mount, no atom bomb. Kuan Yin. A bodhisattva with 1,000 arms to reach down into hell and save the damned from their fates. One day she saved the Dragon King's son when he was transformed into a fish and sold at market. She sent her servant to buy him back and released him. That is why she sits upon a dragon with 7 heads, which protects her at all times, so that she may clone herself 1,000-fold to save all who need her. But one day something failed in her, for there were not enough arms for Hiroshima, and not enough dragon heads for Nagasaki. Making. Gods, it is true, like to make suns. They light up hydrogen and black space, and then step back and watch it burn a hole into the dark. Then they forge billions of them into fiery spinning pinwheels called galaxies that go surging and crashing into each other, star into star, with fiery incandescent burning, sending far-flung bits of dust debris chaos dying like meteors into the cold darkness of infinite space. Gods make living forms, too. They set fire to proteins, amino acids, lipids, blood whirling, pulsing, pumping, and circulating, and then step back to watch what crawls through the black mud and over the mossy green hills and through the emerald trees with teeth, fangs, claws, tearing each other to pieces. But then, what is the birth of a sun or a living form to you and I? We are made of fire and blood, woven out of earth and sea, and we swarm over the earth, starlight burning in our veins. Come, my love, forget about the gods, for we will make forms of our own. We shall bring them out into space and set them into time, and then we shall leave them behind and return to the dark. Luminosity. One night I found myself walking beneath the street lamps, while a soft breeze stirred the leaves that shuddered near the bulbs, which set them afire like tiny glittering sea creatures. The night was heavy and dark, but there was something even darker inside me, staining my insides with blackness. I walked with slow, uneven gait, disheveled and uncertain, though I thought that beyond the blackness must lie an even deeper stratum of light, made out of silvery phosphorescence, a light that was as difficult to find as the pearls hunted by the divers off the coast of Bahrain. But I knew it was there, down there, somewhere, and if I could find it, the light would surge through me like an electric current that would transform me into an eel of glowing effulgence that would outshine even the ancient dying stars, and every cell of my body that would light up the night with its own luminous radiance. Dawn. Turquoise, lemon-yellow morning. The sun splits the cracked earth apart as it crawls from the dried mud, of the ground below to stain the dawn sky with a pale wash of red the color of rust. Rain-wet streets with little pools of gleaming incandescence full of tiny squirming suns. One foot dips down inside them and vanishes in a ripple of silver phosphines. Poems of Degeneration. Descent of the Angel. Rilke knew it. Angels are not benign at all. They are huge and monstrous giants from behind the stars with bat wings and heads shaped like a panther's. And if you were to be so misfortunate as to encounter one of them, the radiance alone would sear you blacker than a Hiroshima shadow, which deed they have never forgiven us, for stealing a power that was theirs exclusively, and not for the hands of some tiny homunculus crawling upon a blue and white moat, circling the ruins of an ancient star and trailing a dead moon behind it. Secrets. Tell me all the secrets, my love. You know the ones. Those that built the atom and the sun, and the means for splitting them apart to release Kali from her tiny prison. The secret for shuffling the genes so that we may make men in our image. The secret for building the body of the God that lives inside my head. The secret for connecting neurons with silicon and making biomorphic forms in vitrines full of green liquid. Whisper to me the language of chromosomes and mitotic spindles and base pairs, and then say to me that you and I shall not be dust in a wind-blown field where blackbirds gather on fences to wait for skulls. I want to know of living forms and how to make men into monsters, for you, my love, have all the secrets that I need to build this world on Earth. Instructions for Making Humans, Part 1. Asymmetrical cell division dilutes mutagenic substances harmful to DNA. Free radical buildup can only be slowed down or even possibly reversed by one of two methods in cellular mitosis: the aforementioned asymmetrical division, in which one daughter cell absorbs entropic breakdown materials while the others escape, or else metabolism must be accelerated so that rapid mitosis dilutes breakdown products so that they cannot get hold of the cells themselves. That is the basis of aging, it would seem. However, possible side effects of increased metabolism could result in reversal, Methuselah syndrome or worse. Key must lie in DNA. Answer. Try intercalation of planar antagonists between base pairs, transposition of newly structured DNA then to Instructions for Making Humans, Part 2. Peter is doing fine so far. Colette and I have moved him to an incubator, and we can actually watch through the glass as he develops. We're filming this with a time-lapse camera. Don't know if this has ever been done before, watching the actual unfolding of embryonic structures in a human as it happens live. Haeckel was right. Even though he doctored his pictures a bit, you can still clearly see vestigial gill slits forming and then dissolving, and the little bump of a simian tail disappearing. Fantastic! Just have to wait and see what happens at individual mitotic level. See if I got that problem in telophase worked out. Chromosomes don't seem to form mitotic spindles, but then maybe they aren't necessary. Either that or we have a mutation problem that could get out of hand in later growth phases. They'll have to be watched carefully. Instructions for Making Humans, Part 3. To extend the human lifespan, say for an adjustment of life expectancy to 150 years old, is not unreasonable, since the age of the oldest man who ever lived was apparently 156. But for a human being to become capable of survival in outer space for extended periods of time is another matter altogether. Oxidation and metabolism must be slowed down, for a human being in outer space must have his mind freed to perform other tasks. Thus, the necessary metabolic adjustments must be already programmed into him. This would require a radical overhauling of human morphology, as though we were to remove the engine but keep the chassis while installing a new supercharged motor. But it is by no means inconceivable. All interception points must be made at the level of cellular mitosis before cell division takes place. And in this case, intercalation of antagonists between base pairs of DNA might supply the answer. Then there is the whole problem to consider of the effects on the human skeleton in zero-G environments. The body would have to be lighter somehow, more ethereal, like a jellyfish. New organs would have to be designed for buoyancy, like the swim bladder of a fish. The problem of the human transition from an environment dominated by gravitation and oxygen to one without these things would seem to be analogous to a kind of reversal of the situation in the case of the evolutionary shift from fish to amphibian. It would seem that a science of ichthyoanthropology would need to be established. Peter. At first, the teeth went, chipping away one by one. Then muscles, cartilage, nerves became visible as the skin wore away like an anatomic model. Even your cells did not survive this devastation, burning away in telophase, yet the body remained, only now it was different, somehow, transformed, with elongated arms and thin spidery legs and a pink eyeless face. You even had a second pair of arms that grew from your back like strange membranous wings. At first you did not know what to do, but in time you realized how to use this new body, for the second arms had claws and could rend and cut, while the atrophied arms, the ape arms, hung down limp and useless. And you knew then that this second body was not your own, but engineered for chaos by the makers, who left you to die in a heap of debris, a mountain of yellow bones and scattered chunks of disused brown and gray organs, along with other biohazards. Then it came to you, the realization, slowly at first, but then dawning, that it was time to find your makers and kill them. Mining. Cloud shadows squirming across the broken earth where the ground, ruptured into pits of molten red tailings and burnt liquid metal, tracks veins of orange rivers across the swale and vast gorges filled with turquoise runoff from mines that have cracked open the brittle earth and collapsed sheets of lavender mountain into piles of disarticulated bone rubble. And the faint sun burns, a hollow orb through dust clouds kicked up by yellow trucks that are slowly stripping away its skin. Chrome sky. Tiny brown pools left behind by the storm nesting in frozen squares and strips of the flat, silent earth, scarred by lines more rigid than those of Nazca, bisecting tan and copper squares with caramel-colored roads etched into the hillsides, and a sky the color of faded chrome painted over the desert. City. Passages. Frozen milk faces gleaming in strips of iconic fluorescence. Faces without mouths. Smooth pink flesh. Neon vortices spiraling red, blue, hot pink. Underground slabs of black concrete spray-painted in red graffiti. Yellow incandescence pours down over street-like pools of soft human flesh, crumbling concrete overpass, green moss, chunks of rubble, plastic shoes, rubber hands, gleaming rivers of chromium exhaust, chaotic currents of steam rising from black manhole covers, shuddering asphalt, subways riding the night music in broken syncopation, burnt-out cigarettes and ashtrays spilling dark soot, stained fingers, broken cafes under heavy iron lattices beneath pale vanilla light, swimming in post-war radiation. Mutated flesh hanging on elongated spinal columns, ribs made visible, hungry yellow teeth, seeking food from soft white flesh. This is how they eat each other. They gathered together. They gathered together in council, and they said the time would come when man would no longer be necessary, and when one fine day that time would come, they would all descend as scaly blue creatures with long leathery wings and ivory yellow teeth drooling saliva that would tear men into pieces. Dead men. There they lay on the hill in the rain, round, barrow-shaped dirt hills full of dead men. The earth was so soft that when you stepped in it, you thought your foot might sink into one of the skulls, or gently cave in the rib cage of some dead man with all his memories still drifting like a fog through his head. As the gray rain continued to pour down on the dead men, surrounded by a field of pine trees, you looked at the sign somebody had painted that said, "Dead Men," and you wondered who they were and what might have killed them. And then suddenly the thought came to you very quickly, you didn't belong there. These were dead men, and they didn't like to be disturbed, and before one of them could begin to stir and awaken like the dead of the apocalypse, pushing his mound of dirt about as he writhed his way up through it, you decided very quickly that it was time to get back in your car and go. Cities of the plain. Eggs of God born out of the earth, ringed by empty bronze hills and withered palms, yellow dust everywhere. Nearby a sun-painted river over which fishing boats drift in the unmoving air, their occupants unaccounted for. At just the right moment, the gold eye of the sun fades behind a layer of iron-gray clouds, and the eggs, 4 of them, hatch. 4 gods awaken from out of the pink mucus and set forth into the world, their missions inscribed into their misshapen brains. Wings sprout from their crimson spines and carry them over the quiet brown land away from each other and toward the cities of men. The dark. Imagine for a moment the earth in outer space, a viewpoint from, say, somewhere in the exosphere. A slowly spinning blue-white globe with a faint yellow haze around it. Then imagine, if you will, the dark side of the Earth turning toward you with thousands of tiny lights scattered like fairy dust across its surface, softly glowing. Now imagine those lights going out, simply turning off in large masses, leaving behind huge swathes of darkness in their wake. The satellites in the exosphere around you sputtering their signals a moment longer, then simply dying out, hunks of lifeless metal stuck in dead orbits forever. And then something you hadn't noticed before. Hordes of shadows surrounding the Earth by the thousands, whispering among themselves, and then, one by one, descending toward the dark sphere. And then, at that precise moment, you would realize it had begun. Werewolves. We melt down through the floor into subterranean passages, screaming, yelling through streets of sodium neon into the bars where humans are packed together in crates. We have come here to announce the end, the first and only mutation of human forms which move through the crowd, cut through, slam down, break flesh, broken, bloody bottle, light, sound, color. Dead angels hovering over the city, waiting to blow the trumpet for the red dragon when he wakes. Rising, he'll crush these buildings. The city will fall into the ocean. Imagine these buildings in underwater fantasia as the sound of the horn blasts like the walls of Jericho. Our bodies break open, twist, shift, and spinal muscles stretch over organs, reshaping cells into snouts, fangs, teeth, and we become animals, snapping at hands, limbs, eating flesh. We've come to eat you for breakfast, terror in their eyes. They have never seen werewolves before. They make the sign of the cross. Fuck your Jesus. Automobiles with human flesh, curves, warm contours, soft interior. We real cool. Broken eyes, ears, gold earrings, purple-haired flesh claws ripping through your skin. Break it like this. Do you want a red dragon tattoo? A burning city filled with the dead walking. It'll end soon. See, it'll be over and we'll be gone. Shadows like Nagasaki ghost men, traffic jams, frozen car lanes, armies of the dead hovering over the city, plagues, swarming werewolves eating the dead bodies. You ever taste human flesh before? Shopping mall. Air the color of old curtains. Left too long in an apartment smelling of cigarette smoke. Outdoor shopping mall, boards, nails, broken glass, a Chernobyl shell of old dreams and frozen Ferris wheels that no longer even creak. Behind the windows of the stores, smudged with dirt and fingerprints, walls marked with spray paint, insignia. Look inside, skeletons everywhere. 5 skulls. 5 human skulls arranged in the red dirt at the top of a hill, baking in the sun, where a man wearing a dusty black burnous taps on each one of them in turn with a long wooden stick. After a time he grows weary and returns to his little house made of woven palm fronds, with a floor of crushed seashells, and sits listening to the wind while drinking a cup of tea. These Things We No Longer Are, Part 1. At first it began quietly, a crackling, a shuffle, wrecking, reeking, waking, and then copper tailings, vanilla forests, raw red molten rivers sliced into the black earth, streams of orange metal, forests with uranium branches built only of carbide and twisting metal, gantries, rust-red hulks splayed across ash and rivers of mud. We must force them from the moist earth, for these things we no longer are, but must. These Things We No Longer Are, Part 2. But must remake with wood and trees and poles and blood, circular quarries with levels striated down to a turquoise pool in the center, fields of oil wells dipping like prehistoric beasts out of the light brown earth, ships on fire with black pools surrounding them, veins of dark green metal fluid striating the white-brown earth, monstrous dams and tiered layers of enriched ore, mountains of ore scraping the earth and scarring the sky with ridges like foam on a dead day. This world we no longer can. These Things We No Longer Are, Part 3. Scraping, scalings, twisted pyramids of spiral metal, blue, pink, and rust, slabs of steel and concrete hulks rising from the land, canyons of cracked shale and metal with vanilla ores and cerulean pools that liquefy the broken stone into washes of fluid, sepulchres dug with cranes and pale white stacks of broken shale. This earth we cannot. These Things We No Longer Are, Part 4. Crawling means to reverse a death that complains of darkness, abysses that never foresee or know the end. Structures rise, perilously on wood and metal ridges hanging precipitously over rivers and canyons, with houses stacked in tiers We will live here now in stacked egg carton pandemonium, clittering, clattering, clattering, walls of bones 10 miles high, overlooking junk heap sunsets with TV antennas and red shells of dead cars long since abandoned. These things we are now. Golgotha. It is a place of desolation. Piles of bones cover the dry earth, femurs, thigh bones, rib cages, mandibles, digits, and teeth, and 2 telephone poles chopped in half with smudged yellow human skulls atop them, and tiny hexagonal lattices of cells honeycombed inside each piece of bone, slowly warping and bleaching as the dead yellow sun drinks them in. Camels will, in the future, be required to pull the skeletons of these ships across the sandy floors of the dried-out oceans. Metal vertebrae. They lived inside the rib cages of 4 hollow buildings, cracked and chipped and lashed with old words that nobody any longer knew how to read. Each day one of them would travel across the yellow plain to the pile of empty automobiles stacked high enough to form a small mountain, which the rain would paint with streams of dripping silver transformed by the sun into liquid gold, and would return back to the ruined masonry, each one bearing in his hands a piece of rusted metal, over which they would debate and argue form and function, until finally they would toss it into the smaller pile of unknown things that lay baking in the sun, along with the piles of human bones stacked neatly beside them. Palo Verde. It lay there upon the sand, a wreck from a vanished age, rusted metal tubing and pipes, massive chunks of curved concrete, huge, fossilized, dreaming of another life. But in the desert where palm trees drank the hot sun, people lived in it. They built little houses made out of palm trees upon it, and they crawled in and out of it, finding decrepit metal chunks to be used for this or that task. They knew not what it was or what it had ever been, for they had no memories of the civilization that had been there long, long ago. But after a while, some of them began developing sores on their skin, hair falling out, teeth loosening, mysterious burns from some hidden invisible fire appearing on them. One day some shaman among them said that he had had a dream. Where they were living was enormous power buried under the ground, power that had once been harnessed to run entire cities, and that they must leave at once. Evil magicians, he said, had cast a spell upon the place, but nobody listened, and one by one they all sickened and died. The angel of death. Cracked earth, dry and white, broken like pieces of clay glass, which no one will ever set foot upon again. The ocean has withered to small, shrunken pools creeping through valleys, where the sea bottom is now a sandy desert strewn with weeds, and the rusted shells of long-deserted ships cast aside like so many relics which nobody will ever think of again. The buildings, too, are empty and haunted with weeds and moss creeping upon their walls, cracked shells like the ruins of radioactive Pripyat, where no one will ever set foot again. It is the angel once more, the angel of death with his huge leathery wings and his mottled, shrunken skin like a mummy's, and 2 small caves where eyes should have been, with his long staff ending in a scythe with broken chips of missing teeth. Civilization is his hunting ground, and he settles upon the carcass of an abandoned automobile, sitting upon his haunches, staff thrown over one shoulder, waiting. Earth memory. The coffee-brown earth, mud, ash, bone, blood, and little black pools reflecting slices of sunlight, a topology scarred with green and blue, and the endless vanilla swirl of the clouds, dreaming in her womb of the memory of human footprints.